parking fees.
Recording in progress.
It predated the parking fees report, which I presented on last year, and a lot of the work that went into the parking fees report was to some extent based on this. So there's some background in there, and with the changes of the parking fees, there have been some, situations changed, but some of the issues have been effectively resolved through that. But there are still some issues still to be settled, and also just for you to be informed about. So the brief I had covered 10 issues or questions in all, and the meaty ones really the first 3 or 4 there. First was to look at the long-term funding model for Napier City Parking Service. We also looked at some problems that have seemed to have emerged around the new MSD, Ministry of Social Development building, which is on the corner of Kennedy Road and Wellesley Road. And leased parking, some questions around whether we got the balance right on that. Also looked at a related issue of the centres of demand for leased parking. So in the event that council wants to create more leased parking, or indeed more all-day parking of other kinds, where would be the most appropriate place to put it? The other issues looked at were whether we should be charging for parking on Sundays. Currently it's free. There's some issues with misuse of on-street parking for car dealerships along Carlisle Street. Whether to expand on the paid parking on a portion of Marine Parade that's currently not charged for. And number 8, the same issue relating to paid parking at so-called Reef Car Park, which is down the opposite end of Marine Parade.
Which one's that one, Murray?
I'll show a picture when we get to it. Yeah. There was another question around whether to create more car parking by introducing diagonal parking on Vortier Street. And the last one was to look at, again, potential another area of paid parking, which is on Hastings Street South. And again, I'll show a picture of where it is. It's probably the biggest issue in this report was the question of what is the best way to ensure a sustainable ongoing funding for the Napier City parking service as costs increase over time. So obviously, as you get inflation, then you need to kind of account for that in some ways. And there's 3 possible ways we looked at that those growing costs could be covered in order to keep the parking service viable financially. One would have been to top up from rates, and that would effectively be subsidising parking through rates. The other was to keep parking fees at their existing level, but increasing the number of car parks that are charged for. And the third, which you'll know was adopted last year, for a general increase in parking fees.
Sorry, can I just touch base on what those costs are? I appreciate that you've got staff, but with our new technology, I'm not suggesting we get rid of staff, but with our new technology, I would assume that our ability to do the job would be easier with sort of a decent balance of staff, or is that including the cost of resurfacing the parking as well?
It covers a number of things, includes, I guess, like the number plate recognition cars. The future will possibly reduce costs there. But there's still some significant costs, particularly around maintenance of car parks, but also purchase of land for more car parks in the future. So there's an accumulating fund which has been built up over the years for ongoing purchases, usually of just bare land to develop the car parks, and they'll always be on sold later. That's the simplest model. So, as we know, fee increases have now been decided upon. I think there's, and that was really the topic of the previous presentation on parking fees, but I think it's useful to also look at some of the broader question of how to fund parking services, and also how those funds can be used in the future in the longer term. And this kind of requires us to step back a little and just think for a moment why we have a parking service. What's the history to it? How did it come about? Why we charge for car parks? Who does it serve? And what are the ultimate aims? So why are we doing this anyway? So so I guess if we imagine what Napier would be like without a parking service, and without any provision for parking, without any controls on parking, so you'd end up with a situation where each individual property owner would be most likely looking after their own needs. And in order to do that, you probably find people buying bits of land around the inner city in order to provide staff parking and their own and customer parking. Now, there would be a number of consequences of that. Obviously, it'd be expensive for the property owner. It'd be highly inefficient, and because you'd be duplicating the number of car parks required, and you'd start to kind of break up the inner city retail area, which would kind of degrade or devalue the inner city. And you'd find that the car parks that you have are all kind of filling up with all-day parkers right in the middle of town, which is not very helpful. So at the end of the day, it's not about revenue. It's not about, so we don't have a parking service in order to just generate revenue. We don't even have a parking service just to control parking. So it's not even about the provision of parking. What it's really about is its primary function. When you get down to what's really at the heart of it all, it's all about making the inner city functional, interesting, attractive place to visit and do business. And so the parking fees, parking regulations, are just tools towards achieving that. I think I mention this because it's useful to keep in mind, particularly when we move on to other questions around ongoing decisions around car parking. Why are we doing this? And that's the primary reason. So, and for the system, the financial system for parking, we also have to consider have a system that's financially sustainable for the long term. It has to be fair and equitable, and has to be able to steer parking behaviour in the ways we want to take it, which is, again, ultimately to make the inner city an attractive place to be. And really, as we've found, the best way to do that is indeed to focus on a self-sustaining user-pays system of parking fees, which is the system we have.
Sally, thank you. So is what we're going to be discussing today specific only to the CBD?
Not entirely, but primarily, yeah.
Okay. Well, because I'm just looking at that rationale and seeing how it would apply in the Ahuriri area as well.
Yes, yes.
You know, so yeah, I'm just trying to understand, I suppose, the parameters.
Yes, yes, yes. So a lot of the same thinking applies. It's about making areas attractive to visit and do business in. And
so, does our current strategy include Ahuriri?
It hasn't historically, specifically, because the issues that are emerging in Ahuriri are relatively new. It is an area which arguably needs, the broader strategy needs to focus on as well.
And so would that be part of the future planning of our strategy?
I think it will be. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry. I can probably expand on that. So the parking strategy initially was just the CBD. The principles apply though, because they're the principles that you would want to expect. They're about placemaking and creating that vibrant CBD, whether that be CBD be Ahuriri shops or Taradale shops. The principles sort of apply. What we need to do though is we need to understand what the parking pressures are in Ahuriri and Taradale, and the meetings that I have with those business associations Thursday night and next Monday and Tuesday will help that. It won't be, I've only got like a 5-minute presentation spot, but what I will do is invite asked to be able to talk and meet with the team and be able to talk about some of the real specific issues that they have. And then we can then work out what are issues for council to deal with and what aren't, what apply to those sort of parking principles, and then we can weave some of that stuff into the work you're seeing here. But for today, I think primarily focused just on the CBD, and we're happy to have discussion about your thoughts around Taradara and Ahuri too, and I can take them into the engagement that I'm having with those business associations.
Okay.
But that work's just sort of starting now.
Okay, so aside from increasing parking fees, the other options were, so the rates increases, but problem there is with equity. Again, essentially subsidising parking fees through rates. Or the alternative being to increase the paid parking area. And the fundamental problem there is that you then start to tinker with the whole machinery of inner city parking. So it runs the risk of sort of tipping the balance of this finely tuned system we have of maintaining the right sort of signals and levers created by parking fees. You might also be wondering, there's a bit of a side issue, but I think it's relevant to also flag it. Could parking fees be used as a source of general income, general to cover other council services? I think it's a fair question if it's on anyone's mind. So the answer there is there are some constraints, will be some constraints on using, in particular, so we have the, I'm thinking here particularly of the reserve fund for parking. There's the problem of the principle of returning benefits to the CBD. This brings me back to what I was saying before about the whole purpose of parking is to create an attractive, interesting place in primarily the CBD for people to visit, do business. It's kind of the heart of the city. There's also a legal issue, which is the existing targeted rate on the CBD property. So historically, there has always been a small contribution to parking from a targeted rate on in the central business district. So it is very difficult, if not possible, to then take that money and use it for some other purpose. Just in summary, it means that parking fee income can't be used as a source of general revenue for projects outside the targeted rated area of the CBD.
Can I just mention, I just mentioned about Taradale in that regard. So I don't know when, but quite some time ago when Taradale got refurbished, the agreement there was paid parking would be put in and paid parking would then pay for the loan funding that paid for that refurbishment. That's still being paid down. I think there's 1.6 million still to go on that one. And if you think about the principles we have of trying to create really good city centres from parking, the idea of sort of loan funding that and putting that, doing that upgrade up front is kind of quite right in terms of our principles. Once that is paid down, what will be quite interesting is how we could collect that parking fee money and use it for the Taradale area, because you're using it to uplift the area from which you're collecting it from.
And just further to that, Rachel, at the AGM, Taradale Business Association, they spoke about that. So,
right.
Yeah, so they are quite well aware of what's going on there. But yeah, it'd be good for you to update.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know exactly how much was left. I wasn't quite sure of because they wanted to know if that money would then go into, obviously, another refurbishment.
Yeah.
Things are a bit tired
on
now.
a principal basis, yes,
Yeah.
if we're thinking about what Murray's telling us.
Yeah.
Whether, but then, that would have to be thought about in terms of LTP projects and priorities and things like that. But yeah, principally, yes.
Yeah, so what it can definitely be used, sorry?
Just a question, could it be used for active transport like cycle lanes and cycle parking to increase healthy kind of CBD?
It's always a little bit tricky.
And reduce congestion in town,
Yeah,
so people are actually...
If it can be shown, particularly to benefit in the city, the ones who pay the targeted rate, if you can link it to some benefit, clear benefit to them.
Yeah, reduced air pollution, that's
Probably
a good one.
it's the acid test, I'd say.
Yep.
Mhm.
Just to understand that better, not show a benefit to the community as a whole, but show a benefit to the businesses that pay the rate. Is that correct?
It's a bit of a, it's a whole lot of grey in it, isn't there? It's hard to know where to draw that line, but I would say it's cycleways, at a certain point they're stretching out of the CBD. You might argue that they're freeing up, removing traffic from the CBD. Maybe that's a line of argument, but it has to be, in my mind, something that clearly benefits our CBD, and in particular, the rated properties and the ones that have the targeted rate for parking in the CBD. So I think it's something that requires some thinking about. I know I hear what you're saying. There's arguments to be made, but you have, there's so many grey areas.
Is it fair to say you have to look at it from the perspective of the business owner who's paying the rate to assign a benefit to the expenditure,
I think that's the most straightforward way, but there's also probably some scope within that, a little bit around the edges.
One example might be the e-bike storage pods. We paid for them out of the parking reserve account, and the idea is that that's an alternative mode of transport that is, you can get around the CBD, you're coming into the CBD, you're parking up your bike. So that's a real benefit to the retailers who are getting more people into the city, So that might be one example of where we use those funds. And I do think that if you're talking about connectivity of your CBD to your wider region or your wider city, if it's connectivity within the CBD, I think you can make a really good argument. Walkways, pathways, and things like that enabled people to move around that city, move around our CBD in a much easier way than bringing their vehicle in.
So I think, historically, the first two bullet points here would be examples of what, historically, we've had purchases of land for more parking. So these are things you could unquestionably use it for. Purchase and development of land for more parking, and given there is an example, a report I did back in 2019 was indicating at that time that the city could probably do with another 185 all-day car parks. Quite how it's sitting now, I'm not too sure, but at that time there certainly appeared to be a shortage of all-day car parking space. Funding could be used to resolve other parking-related issues. So potentially issues centred around the change to the MSD building. There are some complications to that. But also, coming back to what Rachel was saying, it could potentially be used for other enhancements around Napier CBD, like Emerson Street upgrade. Sorry. Yes.
Thank you. Sorry, Megan. So the MSD building thing that prompts me to ask about how do we manage, or what is our approach from a strategy perspective around new developments like the MSD building? So in fairness, those developments, and there's a resource consent aspect to it, so that comes in through one of our doors at council, so we know that this stuff is happening. When do we start having the conversations around parking, or when do we start turning our minds to parking and some of the issues that might be created through those things? Because from a strategic perspective, like you see it happening on the edge of the CBD at the moment around Wellesley Road, et cetera, with new developments too. So how do we kind of fold that in to try and prevent some of this stuff from happening, or pushing it, using levers that we might have with those who are responsible for the developments to be thinking about these things? How do we manage that sort of stuff?
Yeah, good question. And I'll actually be talking a bit about the MSD building shortly.
Okay. And it applies to other buildings too, not just the MSD building?
I guess the same principles apply. It is a difficult one because the government won't allow councils to require car parks. So the council's hands are tied to some extent. And I think council then has to make a decision whether you just say, well, in the case of MSD building, and I'll come to this, you can say, well, it's outside of the controlled parking area, so not our problem. There's some argument for that. Or you could think, well, it's now created a problem for the community, which we need to solve.
And that's the bit that becomes the problem for us. So trying to understand, I suppose, from an officer's perspective, how you manage those scenarios and when those things kind of, I suppose, there's a bit of a red flag or something around new developments, I think is actually really important for us to understand, but also where is there space for us to provide guidance and that pre-planning?
Yeah, so we have, as part, through the resource consenting process, obviously we can't impose a requirement for car parking because of the NPSUD, but we engage with the applicant early on, pre-app stage, and obviously we talk about what the effect is going to be on the surrounding road network as far as provision of on-street parking. You know, if you're already in a well-established residential area, then the congestion that's going to be caused is quite significant. So it's considered to a certain point through traffic impact assessments, you know, and then also just through engagement with the applicant around, you know, what they actually really need to be providing on site in order to ensure that people are going to be able to park a car somewhere. You know, if there's already congestion on the street, the expectation is that you're going to need to provide parking off street. But whether or not the market demands that is another thing. Yeah, we've got other developments that are upcoming that they're already starting to look at providing 1 to 2 parking spaces per unit or townhouse that they're proposing in that application, and it's something where I think that the benefit to the developer in not wasting land to make a site far more developable and not providing car parking, you know, that the benefits are starting to become less and less, I guess, you know, because the market is starting to ask for off-street parking. You know.
And what about when the development's happening? So once again, I'm thinking of Wellesley Road because it's obviously an area that residents are talking to us about quite frequently.
Yeah.
So how do we manage that?
As in when it's been developed?
Correct. So when when there's construction, when there isn't space to park on site and they're parking on street, etc. How are we managing that? What's our approach?
Well, our approach generally, if we receive complaints about, you know, construction vehicles and that sort of thing, where we've got the ability to move them on, we can. In some cases, though, you'll find that there's no provision there for us to be able to tell someone who's lawfully parked within an time limited area to move on.
That's interesting. Yeah, I get what you're saying. It's just, you know, the feedback that I get as a councillor is quite frequently, well within a metre of driveways, people not being able to see when they're, you know, trying to leave their properties, you know, things like that. And I understand that from a resource perspective, for us, that's probably a challenge, you know, for our parking wardens, etc. But I think that, you know, for me as a councillor, understanding what our approach is and the way that we tackle these kinds of issues, or, you know, what's your playbook? Understanding what our officer's playbook is for those types of scenarios is really helpful, and how it overlaps into a strategy.
What you're describing there, Sally, is pure enforcement. If people are blocking driveways or people can't see, or there's any public safety element to people's parking behaviours, that is purely enforcement. So that's just ring our parking team, we will get someone down there to look at it. If they're breaching parking laws, then they'll be ticketed, you know. That's purely enforcement. The other thing, the issue you're talking about too, though, is that blatant disregard for providing any parking for a big building like MSD and leaving it to council's problem, you know, and the impacts to the little businesses around that Kennedy Road area, the impacts to the residents around there. And I know Murray's going to talk on what some options for you as to what you might like to look at to resolve that issue in a minute. But there's 3 stages. The first one is pre-construction. So in that resource consenting stage, like Luke said, we engage, we can do traffic safety assessments, we can do that sort of consenting work, but hands are a little bit tight. The second stage is if there are enforcement issues to be addressed. That could be during or after construction, no problem at all. And the third one is which Murray's going to get onto, is, you know, where you've got actually a problem now created and it's having an impact on the businesses and the communities in that area. So, yeah.
Thank you.
some of those are more a policy setting and some of them might be an enforcement setting.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Okay, so just returning to the slide here, so the, the things that funding can be used for: purchase of land, resolving other problems, but also enhancement of the Napier CBD. And as you're probably aware, Hastings District Council have actually done a similar thing with their laneways development. It was all funded through parking funds primarily. And I think on the basis that it enhances the CBD in other ways. So I think the take-home message is there, where the funding is used, it must lead to either improve CBD parking management or enhance the inner city in other ways. So as far as recommendations go, my recommendation would be no further action other than to continue with the present strategy of funding ongoing operations of the parking service through increasing fees as required, which is currently what's happening. But also just to take note of what I've been saying about the potential uses of the increased income that's now likely to be generated from parking fees, and to be aware of what's definitely possible and also what might be possible in terms of CBD enhancement as a further possible use. So, good old MSD building. So as you know, it's recently relocated to the corner of Tennyson and Wellesley, and the consequences of that have been, among other things, there's been a loss of spaces with all the staff and clients using parking in the area. Some established businesses have been having trouble with providing on-street parking for their customers. I mean, so they have to some extent benefited from just the easiness of being able to find car parks there in the past, and they themselves aren't providing car parks, so it's a little bit tricky. There's also been use of private car parks by MSD clients, and so the right-hand photograph there is you'll see that's the MSD building there across the road, and just in the foreground is the spa and swimming pool shop. And I know they told me, I saw them again yesterday just to check in, and they told me they're still having big problems with intimidation and people parking up in their car park. A fence has now been built around the street frontage and down Wellesley Road, but people are still parking there, straddling the fence and getting a little bit aggressive about it. So they're not too happy. There's also been some greater pressure on other on-street parking, although it will be limited during the day. And that's going to be further affected by the new flats which are going in on Wellesley Road. And there's a recent photograph of one of them there. And as we know, this is all occurring in the context of the recent changes that the central government has introduced, where council legally cannot put any requirements on off-street parking. So in essence, MSD's move has created a new set of issues. And as far as the council is concerned, there's a choice to either ignore those issues, and that's a possibility. As I say, it's outside of the CBD area where there's the managed parking area for the council. And I suppose everyone's kind of competing for car parks. So anyone who's parked on the road is parked on the road because they don't have their own on-street parking. Or the council can get more actively involved in trying to address and manage these issues. But I'd say if these issues are to be addressed, then the solution needs to be largely self-funding. The problem being, if the council is just moving in to provide car parks for everywhere, like these apartments that aren't providing their own, then the council just kind of covering for those developments. So what I've recommended is, I think requires a comprehensive rethink around parking in this area, including some engagement with MSD on the issue. And also to consider bringing the area where the MSD is into the managed parking zone. That there is a specific zone which has existed historically as being the kind of managed parking area. It's where the targeted rate applies. And maybe explore options for land purchases for new off-street all-day parking in that area, which would certainly alleviate the problem at some cost. The other recommendation was to potentially formalise the P120 car parks in front of the businesses on Kennedy Road. But I think if that were the case, then it would be appropriate to also start charging those businesses a targeted rate, because they themselves have not provided their own on-street parking. So if they're to be kind of brought into the fold of managed parking, then I think logically they should be helping to contribute to that.
Sorry, Murray, can you elaborate what businesses? Because you're talking about the businesses along Wellesley Road there that have their own car park, or what are the businesses you're talking about?
So there's a laundromat, some photographs.
Oh, along Kennedy, yeah.
On
Hairdresser.
Kennedy,
Yeah, yeah, okay.
So the one on the
Barber.
left there
Yep.
is,
Yep.
for example, the finance
MTF,
finance company. There's also a laundromat across the road
road, yep.
and a hairdresser
Hairdresser.
across the road, yeah. So they've historically, it's been pretty easy for them up until recent times.
Mm.
And their businesses have kind of rely on people being able to drive in. So the council has assisted, they're established businesses. We want to protect them as much as possible by providing some P120 car parking. But it's all a little bit informal, and there's basically there's no enforcement occurring around there.
Okay.
So
Just an observation, the parking around the laundromat is horrendous.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They
all
park
staff.
on the intersection, they park anywhere they can,
They park on the
close to
footpath.
it, so they can take their washing
Yeah.
without having to walk more than 10 metres.
right.
Yeah.
So if you want some revenue,
Yeah, just the purchasing of land for new car parks, surely that's a waste of valuable CBD space. I mean, like, surely we should be not doing that and actually encouraging people to use other modes of transport rather than more cars in the American way. Do you know what I mean? It's just a personal view, but
Yeah, it's a tricky one, and it's always a balancing act in the CBD. And historically, the council has provided car parking, car parking areas, again, to take the responsibility away from the whole mash of businesses from doing that. It does create a much more efficient use of space. We do need some parking in the inner city, and by having it under council's management and control, we can be careful about where those car parks are placed. So we typically, all-day parking is around the periphery of the inner city. It is a balancing act. Sorry, I don't know if it answered your question. Okay, any other questions on the MSD? Okay.
So just on that one then, Murray, are you asking whether
council wants us to explore some of those options? Like, we probably need some direction, don't we, as to whether you want to let it play out, or whether you want us to explore options for expanding targeted rates
Yeah,
into that area?
Yeah, I think it would be useful to have some guidance on that. I do think it is a problem which council can at least explore some solutions to. Whether solutions, silver bullet solutions exist, I'm not so sure, but maybe I'd alleviate the problem, certainly by talking to MSD, exploring some possibilities about providing car parking in that area, and also dealing individually with some of the smaller businesses.
I struggle to see how, I don't think MSD is going to do anything.
No.
They're meeting the requirements that they have to meet. So, and they can't magically conjure up additional car parking.
And we don't rate them, do we?
Pardon
Some
me?
are government buildings, they don't pay rates.
Well, I don't think there's a government building. The government is in there, but it's
No, it's
privately
owned
owned.
by someone else.
Oh,
Yeah.
almost, oh,
I
that's
think
right
it's-
then.
Yeah.
Mm.
That was going to be my point.
Yeah.
It's
So
not really them you
that's-
need to talk to,
Yeah.
if you're going to talk to someone.
Mm.
I mean, given the problems at the, the cuts and colours and the laundromat, that's a real hotspot. So we definitely could do something there.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of antisocial behaviour too, people parking on footpaths. So I think maybe something where it's more formalised there would definitely help. I don't know what you guys think, but I go around there a lot and it's pretty bad.
Yeah, and
Did that pre-exist, MSD? Like, were those parking behaviours around that laundromat, was that like it before?
Not as bad.
The types of businesses that are there.
Mm.
yeah, I think it's been exasperated. Yeah.
So, sorry, Mary, just so I get clear, for us to, is this the targeted rate would be if we were to charge, or the targeted rate is simply just to enforce?
No, the targeted rate is for us to
Gather
charge
revenue.
them and then provide parking to
Right.
fix the problem.
So for us, we could provide direction perhaps just to maybe enforce that 120 area. that you've-
Yeah, I think in practice it would be probably actually both looking for provision of car parking and enforcement of that car parking.
Which is an increase in level of service, basically, isn't it? Widening the area.
To be fair, that whole area's got issues because you just move a little bit further along, you've got Wallasey Road Medical Centre, the medical centre there, which can be very hard to get a park, and the more services that they plan to put in there. And then you've got your residents who, most of those old homes weren't built with car parks because they're, and so they have no parking. Do we do like Wellington and have residents only parking things that for those people in those homes, because it's not their fault that there wasn't a car park. The homes were built, pre-cars. So yeah, that whole, it's not just that one bit, because those MSD people are parking when you need to go to the doctor as well.
Mhm.
So kind of like a whole thing.
Yeah, and what I can't envision in my mind, I think you said something about managed parking areas where the targeted rate applies currently. Is that correct? Was that what you
Yeah,
said?
yeah.
Yeah. So what does that area look like? Like, I can't imagine it in my mind. Like, it'd be great to have a map, because the other thing that I've got overlaying is the NCBI aspect of it, because their mapped area, their boundary is actually very small, like doesn't even extend to where regional council is.
Right,
So is there a discrepancy between
yeah.
the managed car park area and those that are paying a targeted rate
Yeah, so
already?
I guess what I'm calling the managed parking area has historically been called the parking exemption area. So historically, in the days when the district plan did have requirements for parking, there was areas of the city in the CBD, portion of which, in downtown area, had 100% exemption from those rules. And then there was another portion more to the south, adjoining it, which had 50% exemption from those rules. So, certain floor area, normally you'd have to provide, 2 or 3 car parks, and the CBD have to provide none, and council looks after the parking. So that, because all properties are now exempt from having to provide car parking, that's kind of no longer meaningful. But if you think about coming back to what those areas are created for, they are effectively managed parking areas, so providing a service within that area for businesses or property owners.
But what is meaningful is who's being charged for it, because people are, some people are paying a targeted rate.
Yes.
So that's the bit that's actually meaningful. So when I'm thinking of the area that you're talking about, in my mind, isn't that the area that's determined by who's paying a targeted rate?
Yes, at the moment, I've got a map in front of me. It goes from Edward Street, Munro Street, Edward Street, Munro Street, all the way up, and Doglegs in up Browning Street, skirts around Herschel and down Ring Parade.
Where does it cut off though? It cuts off before Vautier, doesn't it? Or is it Station Street?
Munro.
No, Edwards. She said
So there's
Edwards.
So that's the Edwards that way, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then
There's a
Munro.
100 exemption
That's
zone and a 50 exemption zone, but the whole area is bordered by Edwards, Munro, and then sort of right up to the Brown.
Are the different percentage exemption areas, are they still paying a targeted rate or are they not?
There are two different, there's
Different
a,
rates.
two different rates. There's a 100%.
And then there's the
there's
50%.
a full rate and there's a half rate.
I mean, the issue I have with extending that managed parking zone, I mean, where are you going to find land to buy to create more off-street parking? I mean, that in itself is,
Mhm.
there's no land anywhere in those areas.
If you like. No.
I'm not very good at lip reading, sorry, Rachel.
We don't have any sort of specific sites that we can talk about. It's something that
I suppose the question in my mind is kind of around that level of service, right, that we want to provide as a city. So thinking it through in my mind, if we were to look at extending the managed parking zone, you're going to have a mix of commercial properties in that zone, some of which have on-site parking, some of which don't. So you would need to allow for in your strategy some sort of partial exemption or full exemption, I guess, from that targeted rate based on your provision of parking already on site, because it wouldn't be fair and reasonable in my mind if they've set up a business in a commercial zone with providing their own parking, and then we've overlaid them with, and you've got to contribute to the community good kind of parking. So you bring in that additional layer of complexity if you build that out. But I think what I come back to is, what is the community's expectation for managed parking as our city naturally grows and intensifies into those fringe commercial areas like where that MSD building is. And I think what we've seen from community feedback is that they did have an expectation that we would be managing parking around large commercial developments outside of the currently managed parking zone. So is it possible that we give the direction that for all fringe commercial zoned land outside of the parking area, we come up with a strategy for extending the targeted rate where you are not providing your own on-site parking to a certain calculation?
Hmm.
Is something like that
Yeah,
feasible?
possibly. I guess it's all about the bigger package of what the parking service is, which includes enforcement. So like at Balmoral, the people using those car parks, which are private car parks, but they're using it as effectively public car parks. Although I guess that enforcement wouldn't apply to that.
Yeah, that's not enough issue.
Yeah, it's a tricky
I
one.
mean, the enforcement comes back to parking behaviours regardless, right? You either meet your parking behaviour, i.e. your time standard, you're over cycleways, you're close to, what do you call them, vehicle exit ways, that sort of stuff. But
On public land.
Yeah.
And private land, that's for them to enforce.
100%. But if you were to extend your managed parking area on a reasonable basis, i.e. where you're not providing your own on-street parking, you're captured by a targeted rate that would allow that enforcement to occur, acknowledging that enforcement would occur across a wider area than the targeted rate.
Yeah, I suppose the other thing would be taking pressure off, particularly if you're providing additional car parking, it would be taking pressure off people's private car parks that are currently being used by.
And just while I have them, my gut feel is that as the city naturally intensifies, both commercially and with inner city or close to inner city living, like both of the examples we've talked about today, there will be an increased demand for leasable parking spaces. So I think it is reasonable for us to look at revenue options to obtain land for that, because that need is only going to get more, not less, as inner city living becomes more prevalent in and around the city centre.
Yeah, so there is currently a fund, of course, an accumulated fund for land purchase, for parking. I'm not sure of the current size of it.
But you would want to increase your revenue as well.
Yes,
Yeah,
of course.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that reserve account has been built up from within the targeted area, rate area. It's not been contributed by these newer areas that we're now focusing on. So they would have, like you say, no free ride. The reserve fund that we've got right now
Oh,
has been built up by the targeted area.
yeah, yeah.
It's not been, by the areas that we're looking at now. So, they would have to be targeted to have a targeted rate for them to contribute.
Yeah, I think that's the point. If you are creating parking primarily to serve these other areas, you don't want to be just using money which has actually been made outside of that area. They need to buy into it as well.
Can I just comment on the inner city living? If we're sending targeted rates to basically households within the area now that's not for customers. So how do we get on with a targeted rate if half the building's used for living? Because if it's about providing space for your customers, people living there wouldn't be deemed customers.
No, so it would be based on property value, I think, only for the targeted rate. It won't be determined by what the use is or anything like that.
Yeah, that's weird.
Basically, the idea of the targeted rate is to say, if every business went and put their own parking in for their customers, we would have a really disjointed CBD. You would have gaps of parking everywhere. To have a really tight, close-knit CBD, we say, don't worry about providing parking. Council will provide that, but you pay a targeted rate. So you're exempt from having to provide the parking because we want a really tightly constrained CBD. And we will provide the parking, and then we have a parking strategy that sort of tries to bring, your commuters to the outer skirts of your city and to walk in, and the shoppers and then to have the opportunity to come right in. So it's, you have a strategy that applies the parking, but the idea is that we don't want our shops to have to provide parking as well. That'll just break up the city.
Rachel, Richard's question though around livable spaces and the targeted rates, do they currently apply?
It's use.
Yeah, so it's regardless of use.
Think about Marine Parade, how we had those residents parking, all the residents on Marine Parade parking on Marine Parade, and then commuters would take those car parks and they felt they were for them and that sort of thing. So, it does, regardless, I think what Murray's saying is regardless of the use, if you have a building of this sort of square meterage or this sort of level, then this was what you normally have to provide in terms of car parking, but we're saying we'll do a targeted rate and we'll provide the parking.
Can you opt out and provide your own parking
No,
of the targeted rate?
Kind of, it works for everybody. It's actually it's cheaper and more efficient, even for the property owner, to kind of farm it out to the council.
But you don't get the option. There is no opt out.
If you want to provide their own parking, they can.
Pay the targeted rate.
Yeah, it's I think they can do that if they wish, but it doesn't exempt them from the rate.
The residential development down on Raffles Street, 62, I think it is, next to the Raffles Street Cafe. So they're part of the 50% targeted rate. They still provided at a minimum one space per unit, in some cases two, irrespective of the fact that they were still 50%.
Yep. So, and I was actually just going to suggest that one because they'll be 100%.
No, they're 50%.
Yeah, but the 100% living in there, no commercial activity, running out of it, just household. So just looking at your targeted rate, are we after commercial? Are we after living? Or is it just a blanket thing that we can do? For example, if I bought one of the new houses in Wellesley Road, would I be exempt? Because I'm outside the zone, it's residential. If I Airbnb that, am I getting a better advantage over, say, the Raffles Street people? Same thing, slightly different location, same activity.
It's outside the managed parking zone.
Yeah, Wellesley Road's not in that zone.
But if we extended the managed parking zone.
Do we know how much we make out of the targeted rate currently?
That's a good question. No, I don't.
I
can find out and come back to you on that.
Thank you.
I think in the overall scheme of things, it's not a massive amount in the total budget for parking, but there's a contribution.
Can I just ask a question about Hastings Street, past the warehouse? So before, those car parks were often free on the road, and now it's back to back all day, every day. Has that been considered as being brought into a parking P120? Because people are parking there, commuting, parking there and then going in, but then there's no parking at all for anyone else.
I'll be coming to that.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Okay, shall we carry on?
I don't know that we've provided you with any direction there, Murray.
Yeah.
We've talked around in circles.
Can you phrase up the questions for us really
Yeah.
succinctly?
Well, it's whether we want to look into extending the CBD managed parking zone.
Mm.
Personally, I still struggle with the fact of where on earth you're going to find the land to purchase to do this additional parking if you did extend the managed parking zone.
The
Well, could it
revenue
be
aspect.
building up on our existing land as well? For instance, we've got all that Voltaire land that we've always talked about, you know.
In Lower Dickens Street,
Yeah.
so doing a multi-storey type.
Yeah.
But that's not really servicing the area that we're extending the managed parking zone to.
Mm.
Yeah.
It would relieve parking in that area though, so then, because it's quite close. People
It wouldn't though, because we all know that Napier people like to park
Park
directly
outside,
outside the
yeah.
building that they're going into.
If we make it affordable though,
All
commuters might
day. Yeah, all
park
day.
less on the
Mm.
outskirts. So.
If you wanted us to look into that more and then report back to you, that's an option.
Can't force people, Juliet.
Get the bus,
No,
use a
Mm.
bike.
no.
So old fashioned, this whole thing.
Even with electric cars still need to
Okay,
park
what's
somewhere.
the general feeling?
No.
It feels
Yes,
point-
look
yes.
at extending it.
Yeah, it feels pointless to
I
me,
think it
but
is
I'm
as
happy to go with the majority.
Yes, I suppose broadly the choices are either to just kind of leave things be with the MSD and just let it take its course, and things muck along, or to get more involved with trying to ease
I
some
feel
of the
like we're
problems
setting
there.
ourselves up for failure. If we get more involved, I'm more inclined just to,
It's too big.
probably not in the right mindset today.
I think in terms of our current challenges, I tend to lean towards leaving it alone, but I'm also conscious that,
Future.
you know, the future intensification, like we've just seen 2 apartment blocks in one street, we're bound to see more kind of on that fringe as
Yeah.
we've, through our district plan, made inner city living more sort of affordable. We know we've got resource consent sitting there for a whole lot of other, apartment buildings and things like that that are not going to provide the level of probably car parking that the residents will have, because like it or not, if you live in Hawke's Bay, you usually still have a vehicle, and you don't have to provide a park with your build at the moment. So that need is just going to keep going up.
Can I suggest maybe a next step forward, which doesn't take you right to strong direction at this point, but we engage with MSD and understand what they're doing for their staff in terms of parking. It might be an employment issue that they have around safety and things like that. So let's understand where their commuters are parking and how they're managing that internally. We can also look at commercial options and bring that to you in a closed workshop around what could be strategic purchases in that area that might be able to offset or be paid through an extension of the targeted rate. And we could do some more problem definition on what is actually the problem. If the main problem is parking behaviours by customers of the MSD, then that's an enforcement response. If the main problem is that people are parking into private car park land, well, that's a private landowner response. If the main problem is our small businesses on Kennedy Road and our residents, then that's something that might compel us to do something a little bit more. So we could work up a little bit more problem definition for you and bring that back together with those other 2 things.
Through you, Mayorwise, I think yes to 2 and 3. Number 1, I think
know.
that's leave it
Yeah.
with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And because it's not just MSD, I mean, there's Kāinga Order, there's a whole bunch of different government department
yeah.
tenants. So, yeah, I'm really interested in what the revenue would look like with the extension of these areas and the targeted rate as well, to understand, what level, what investment we could plan for in the future as well based on that.
Because there's another development in Owen Street too happening.
Nice.
Yeah, look at Manana.
So just-
Parking. So, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, you know, we need to know what it actually money-wise looks like too, because if we're needing to create additional parking, if we're the ones that are going to do it, then we need to know what we've got to work with.
So just to be clear, the recommendation is to explore the extension of the targeted rate and also what commercial options there may be that we could bring back as part of a closed workshop.
And some more problem definition about whether we've got existing tools to deal with some of the concerns in that area.
Considering growth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Growth aspect.
Okay, very good. We'll just move on now to the next issue. This is the leased parking, and Napier has a relatively high number of car parks, or leased car parks. If you have the report in front of you on page 15, I did a table showing relative to other centres what the provision of leased car parking is. On a per head of population basis, we've got 6.7 leased car parks for every 1,000 head of population. The next closest would be, I think, Dunedin at 5.7. Or Tauranga 6.4. But anyway, we're right up there in terms of the total number of leased car parks we have, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but so leased car parking is certainly useful. It has its place, but there's also some problems with it, and so far as it's less efficient than casual all-day parking. That's because when someone leases a car park, they drive away, no one else can use it, whereas casual car parks, they can. As you remember from when we were talking about the parking fees, historically they've been underpriced, especially once you allow for tax savings. And at the time of writing this report, I was saying that increasing the price would help to manage demand. And of course, we have now since put the prices up. And there's also a broader issue, which has actually been part of the discussion just now around future issues, which are likely to arise if CBD apartments are permitted to rely on Napier City Council leased parking. And that's because, you know, this whole problem of a developer wanting to build a development, block out some council loan lease parking and advertise it to buyers saying, oh, look, it comes with leased car parking. People may assume that buyers may then assume that that's kind of always going to be there. And developers may assume that they can always just keep on coming to the council to expect them to meet their parking requirements. When in fact, the whole idea within a city living is part of the rationale to it is should be less reliance on cars in those areas. So it's just something to be a little bit cautious of. So the recommended actions on this particular issue was that the recent increases in leased parking fees will hopefully moderate demand. Now, I'll just qualify that by saying apparently initially demand did go down, but appears to have swung back up again. So no further action at the moment, but I think we do need to monitor what happens there in terms of user response. And the other thing is I think some further reflection and analysis over time will be required on how to manage this potential future demand for City Council leased parking from inner city parking developments. It's a little bit unresolved, and it's just something I think we need to be a little bit cautious of in terms of particularly how much leased parking we continue to provide if it's ultimately just meeting that demand.
I can't help but think about whether there is a commercial opportunity for us in regards to parking. So looking at it more holistically around from a growth perspective in the city. So you know, not thinking about targeted and fringe and anything like that, but more the growth aspect. So how much, and I don't know how we do it, but I'm just thinking it through. You know, what does the ideal CBD area look like to us in fringe? how many businesses, how many people do we want living in there, those kind of numbers, and sort of working backwards as to determine the need. And if we were to say perhaps invest in a multi-level development with car parking, you know, does it give us the opportunity to change the level of lease that is in that building, so to speak, and you know, and change it as per the need of the community. Like, I'm trying to flip it so it's not just a problem all the time, that there's actually an opportunity for us here. So I don't know, is that something that you think of, or that's considered, or like a business case type situation? Or
Yeah, so generally there's not a lot of money in parking. And we've looked before at the parking building thing, and the problem with that is once you commit to building a parking building, it's hard to move on. With the strategy that currently exists is to buy just bare land that can then be immediately on sold whenever the demand changes, because, you know, businesses like MSD building moving suddenly, you know, certain car parks maybe have very little demand, so you can just quickly sell it. And we also find that it's better to have, particularly for all-day parking, rather than one big concentrated parking building
Spread it
where everyone
round.
has to go to, just scatter it about. There'll always be a business nearby that will want to use it.
And I guess that's the point, right?
Yep.
I feel like there will always be a user for it.
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
that's
Agreed.
the sticking point for me. There seems like there will always be a user for it. Like, for example, us increasing the price, yes, there was a small dip, and now demand is still high. It's kind of like we can't just pull it, the rope here or push it and it doesn't come out somewhere else. You know, it's like whack-a-mole kind of thing. So how do we be more coordinated, I suppose? And I'm just thinking out loud, but there's got to be an opportunity there. Like, okay, you say there's not a lot of money in parking. Well, whoever owns Wilson's car parks, I mean, I don't know what they think.
And that's what I was just thinking about. So, you know, we've got our bigger cities where obviously a large part of their parking provision sits with private providers, but we don't seem to have the ability to attract Wilsons here. So, which would tend to suggest that it's not profitable for them.
Do you reckon?
They were in the Manahuriri, part in Nahuriri.
Yeah, and no one ever parked there because they had to pay.
Yeah.
So,
But as we get more
it's falling
people-
on us because the private sector clearly isn't interested in being part of the solution.
Yet, until there's more people, until there's more business, it feels like we're kind of on that cusp. Like, you look at all the development that's going on, not just in the CBD, but in Ahuriri and stuff. And I mean, I had to walk across the bloody railway lines the other day to park. Stumble across with my boots on and stuff. You know, it was quite precarious because there isn't enough parking there. Not with the stuff that's going on there now, not with the, you know, the Madam Social and Morena and all that activity and the new residential and stuff. So it's just, I don't know, there must be some kind of opportunity.
And I see an opportunity in that library, Dalton House area, because that is going to be there's going to be a lot of employees in that area. How much parking is Dalton House providing?
Very little.
Very little. And so you're sitting looking at this map, I'm looking at the map and looking at, we've got the library, we've got Dalton House, we've got our new staff accommodate, you know, and then we've got these kind of leased car parks there. Is the potential to turn those into some sort of parking area for and they're quite close to the new development proposed by Manahuriri and all that sort of stuff. You know,
I guess
that end of town.
I guess what I'm hearing through you, Mia Wise, is if we were to say to our CCTO, is there an opportunity, commercial opportunity in our parking holdings, would they have the same view that we take?
Yeah.
Because, you know, relative to, there's a double whammy with that as well. I mean, if you build it high enough, it's a tsunami. You can cruise in there and jump up there for a tsunami. Sometimes they've told us that we won't have much time to climb up the hill. So if there's an opportunity there, it's a double whammy.
If you remember the Streets for People presentation,
Mm.
and it comes back to the placemaking.
Mm.
If you keep meeting demand for parking and bringing it close into your CBD, what city are you creating? So if you think about some of the more congested cities like Wellington and things like that, where you know, new buildings are being built all the time, but they're not, the council isn't providing more parking as a result of that investment. Commuting is a key
Yeah,
part of living in a tightly constrained city. Parking well on the outskirts and finding other means to come in. And so I just do worry about, when we talk about this intensification and growth that we're going to be coming towards, that intensification and growth has to be in a really vibrant and livable way, rather than kind of saying, yes, we're a car city.
We just,
Yeah,
we don't have the public transport.
Yeah, I was
system.
about to say that.
exactly right.
It's always one of those,
don't.
yeah, chicken and egg things, like
Yeah.
if we got the public transport
no
sorted
way.
out, then maybe people would use it.
Parking on our outskirts isn't that far a walk for people. Like,
It's
we still-
changing entrenched behaviour of. And so if
why
that's
that
what we
Fortier
want,
Street
is for that change to occur, then it means we just don't do more parking, and eventually people will just have to realise that.
Yeah, but we do have existing parking assets, and to the point of commercial opportunities, no reason why you couldn't say, of those existing assets, like we're not going to build a whole lot more, but of those existing assets, is there a more commercial opportunity?
Yeah. But that's not going to solve the
No.
underlying problem. Yeah.
The other side, the other risk we have is we can try and change behaviour, but what's to stop another Kmart coming along and all of a sudden the CBD's dead because someone else provides more car parks? You know, there could easily be another
Yeah.
development that we have no ability to stop because they're just a development, and all of a sudden they go up there and our CBD's gone.
That's
Yeah.
certainly one of the arguments that I know CBD businesses,
Yeah.
you know, make quite frequently, and that
So
and really
it's
worries
catch-22.
them. Yeah,
So
really
yeah,
worries them.
like you said, Rachel, it's trying to find that good balance, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's trying to create that beautiful city that people just want to come into.
Mm.
You know,
Yeah,
They'll
so,
come and they'll spend the day.
yeah, and I think what Rachel's saying is it's a lot about also creating a really lovely, interesting, vibrant environment. And there's the two sides of the coin. One is you can provide a lot of car parks, and it can kind of kill the inner city just by doing that, because it becomes really boring. Or you can not provide enough car parks and no one can get in to get there. So you've got to strike that careful little balance between the two. There's always going to be that tension there. It's just the nature of it.
I think one day we'll get our public transport a lot better than what it is, which will drive what we're trying
Keep up.
to do. I
That's
said
it.
one day,
Be
or
positive.
1
keep
year, but
positive.
I think that will help what we're looking at. You know, if you've got a regular transport system that you can trust.
I think the thing is though that we're tasked with thinking 10 to 30 years out here as well, right? Like we're not really talking about the MSD building anymore. It's all the other stuff that's yet to come.
Yes.
So that's the balance. And so, you know, things like our land transport planning and things like that, like those are all the things that have to overlay to help guide what we're trying to do here. Because, yeah, we maybe by then we will have a much better infrastructure available to us, but that's how we need to be thinking.
Yeah, so in terms of the provision of car parks and working out what is the optimal amount, there is a system that's worked through. There's an annual parking survey that's done around Christmas time. They go through and count the occupancy of car parks, and there's a model we work by. So if it's I think overutilised, which is too many cars, not enough car parks, then you're generally getting I think 90% utilisation of car parks. And underutilised is defined as, I think, 40% or less utilisation. So that's the formula that's sort of worked on within the CBD as a whole to get a sense of whether or not enough car parks exist and whether more need to be provided. It's always going to be changing from year to year.
Yeah.
I don't think we're going to get far fast as a city, to be honest, until we start some of our thinking and changing our thinking. We're a very flat city. And going up, you're only just seeing now apartment blocks 2 or 3 stories high and coming about. That'll start changing some mentality. Why, if you look through our main city, nothing's high. You know, you could have retail on the bottom, car park,
Mm.
and residential on the top.
Yeah.
So that would free up the same amount of space that we're currently doing in an open area.
Agreed.
But obviously, there's not money to be made in those levels of car parking, but it puts a number of people right above your shop.
Mhm.
That's how malls do it.
And when all the cars disappear, then you can turn that into commercial, retail or housing.
Yeah.
It's kept Juliet happy.
That's how all the big
Everyone
cities do it.
Yeah,
Everyone
Yeah,
can
and-
cycle
and
to
that's
Juliet
the
happy.
opportunity.
Yeah, and it's a Sunday market space and it's a
Yeah.
this and that.
That's the opportunity.
Vibrant.
Okay, shall we
One right there.
move on to the next? So the next, probably the last of the larger issues really beyond this fairly relatively minor, is this question of centres of demand for, in this case, leased parking. So my brief at the time this was done, we were looking at maybe whether to provide more leased parking, and if so, if you did that, where would you put it? Actually, on page 19 of the report, which you'll have, there's a map showing where all the parking is. Not only city council parking, but also private parking. And sort of larger dots show where the big car parks are, bigger and smaller dots for the smaller car parks. So what we found is that currently leased parking, whether it's city council or private, is pretty well distributed through the city. But if anywhere, I would say that probably the emerging need is in the direction of the MSD building, partly on account of the problems with the MSD, but also when you look at the map, that if anywhere, that's possibly where there's a hole to fill in terms of parking space. So let's go back. Yep. So in terms of recommendations on this, the same with the recent changes, the increases in parking fees, demand may reduce anyway, which maybe now looking at a slightly optimistic projection, but we need to sort of monitor that response. There's still issues, as we've talked before, around the new MSD building, but additional all-day parking, I'd say casual all-day parking rather than leased parking may be the better solution there, if you're looking to provide more car parking. Okay. The other questions were, should there be paid parking on Sundays? That was pretty easy one for me to get an answer to. I just spoke to the industry marketing people. They said, spoke to our members. They said no. And so I think unless there's support from the retailers, then no sense in going any further with it. There was the issue with the car sales yards on Carlisle Street, and you see in the photograph there an example of what we're seeing down Carlisle, where there's maybe 2 or 3 dealerships which extend their show space out onto the street. And the question was put to me was, what can we do about this? And finding is that actually the council does already have necessary bylaws. The constraint is mostly on enforcement effort and time. And so the best course of action is just to talk to the dealers and follow up with enforcement if required. So it's relatively straightforward, but I'd say the parking people have got quite a bit else on their plates at the moment.
The silly thing is there's no parking left for their customers. There's no parking left for their customers, which is a bit
Well, true, yeah.
counterproductive
They'll
for
probably
them.
park down the street
Yeah.
someone else's place.
Customers either.
You've engaged with do you want to update on how that's going?
Yeah, so we received quite a few complaints about Mercedes in particular, and we've been engaging with the managers of the local office, but that didn't get much of a response. So we just went to the managing director of the parent company, and they've assured us that they won't be breaching the bylaw, which is displaying vehicles for sale whilst on Council's Road Reserve moving forward. And so we monitor that now quite closely. Obviously we're sort of down a couple of parking offices at the moment, But yeah, as things pick up, they monitor that area.
Can I just say thank you for that? Because I had a lot of people engaging with me about parking issues and they really are grateful. I followed up as well and they're
Yep.
really happy. So it's made a big difference. So thank you.
That's right.
Chuck us a ticket book. I'll go down Carlisle Street for you.
Yeah.
So,
Go down Carlisle Street with the ticket book. Unregistered, unwarranted. Oof, it's gonna be a field day.
They use electronic stuff, Richard. Sorry, mate.
Right, so the next issue is just this question around whether to introduce paid parking to this portion of Marine Parade. So you recognise from the photograph that's just opposite the fountain, Tom Parker Fountain. So that's currently
Free.
120 limited, time limited, but free. And so question was, should we introduce paid parking to that area? So the finding there was that your pay parking can be justified. You know, as demand shifts around the city and demand for parking increases, what were kind of fringes of the outer fringes of the sort of managed parking area or the place we really want to apply fees to, we just occasionally got to review those fringes. And I say we're just at the tipping point now where there is justification for bringing fees into that area. It is frequently used for commuter parking, and the existing paid parking is at in that area is at a similar distance from the city centre. So there's definitely would be justified to introduce paid parking in that area. It would just maybe require a bit of last analysis to look at any possible knock-on effects. Every time we change parking, there's always going to be some unexpected consequence. But I think it would be justifiable.
Murray, how many car parks are you talking? How many approximately?
It's probably, it might be 15,
Oh,
I'm
quite a lot.
guessing.
Huge amount, isn't it?
it's going to make the people that go to the gym happy.
Yes.
Lord,
Well, no,
we're
it
only-
stops at
we're only
Browning
talking about-
Street.
We're only talking about the portion which is not really
Stops at Browning Street.
opposite.
oh,
It's pretty prime parking.
It
Yeah.
is, yeah. And, you know,
Pretty close.
Yeah.
and you know, this is the thing. We don't have to be charging everyone for parking. You charge parking where it's useful, where it's a tool. And in this case, it's just starting to get to that tipping point where we need to apply a little bit more control. The most effective way to do that is through fees.
Harry, would that be all day, so people could park, or what sort of paid parking model would you have?
Yeah, to be honest, I haven't thought through that, Rachel. I had imagined it to be probably 120. But
I would have thought probably one.
could be all day. It's an option. Yep.
I think the benefits of all day is that if people just want to park for 120, they can. But people can utilise it for longer stays. Some people might stay in the CBD for 5 hours or something, but not wanting to move their car.
Yeah, so
But
the,
then some people might just stay there all day and we don't achieve anything by.
Yeah.
yeah, so the other, you can have something like Tiffany's car park, which is paid parking all day. But expensive if you stay there all day, but it's, you can do it. $2 an hour, hold it for however long you choose to stay there. Okay, so the next car park we looked at, same question, whether to introduce paid parking to the Reef car park. So there's a photograph of it. It's down
Across from our Cape
just
View.
past the Sunken Gardens.
Just
Yeah, in direction of skate park around that way. It drop off the road, lovely little car park there.
roof park.
It actually, I think it used to be a much larger, kind of like a basketball
and it was all day
court
parking.
sort of parking. There was leased parking, all sorts there. Just a bland, big car park. Took a lot of cars, but it was pretty ugly. And in fact, I think at the time it wasn't terribly well utilised because it was so big. So again, looking at, I would say that pay parking again can be justified. It's sited close to existing paid commuter parking and currently has a weird sort of mixture of use, which means its function is unclear. And it's one of the things that tends to happen when you're not charging for it. You get a lot of all-day parking and a lot of some recreational uses of the reserve. At the time I wrote my report last year, one thing I flagged was we were unsure at the time whether we could actually do that, whether we could charge for parking in that area because it is a reserve under the Reserves Act. And in the meantime, we have actually had a legal opinion that says, yes, we can charge for it, but we can only charge for, we can't charge for lease parking because then you are leasing a bit of land to someone if you're just charging for the use of it. And the goal is to, free up car parking spaces, make more efficient use of the space, then that would be allowed. Yeah, so in this one again, a little further analysis required to work out the optimal mix of the type of paid parking that you would have there. But in principle, it would be fine.
So that's across the road from the little slipstream street that runs along Marine Parade. What's the parking there at the moment? Is that paid or is that 2 hours free?
Whereabouts?
So you got reef and then, so if you were going to charge for that, then you'd surely introduce
You'd have
paid
to do-
parking in that slipstream as well.
Yeah.
Some of the slipstreams paid.
You'd extend it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you might want to extend it if you're talking up on the high side of Marine Parade.
Yeah.
Along where the houses and the couple like Rome, the
Where the
coffee
road
shop
is.
and all
Yeah,
that. Yeah,
yeah.
so there's a portion of that that's already paid parking.
Yeah.
The Reef Garden Park
Is it?
is just 2 hours.
So you'd want them
it's
aligned.
2 hours unpaid.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we can charge for hourly parking or casual parking down there, but not leased. Like we can't have
No.
leased there.
No,
That's fine.
but if you were going to start charging for there, you'd want to be the same over in the slipstream road.
Yeah.
Yeah. Equidistance from the CBD.
I think it's 120 down to
About
Albion
6
Street.
metres.
Albion, yeah.
Down to Albion.
Oh, to
and then-
Albion.
And then Albion is then the meter that
Charge.
puts your number plate in.
You'd make the whole lot paid parking if you were making reef paid.
The paid parking extends beyond Albion Street heading south.
Oh, does it?
Yeah.
I thought it was 120. It's 120 up to somewhere.
Mm.
So it's definitely 120 outside Cape View.
Mm.
And the only reason I know that is because one of the meters got melted when that Kiwi Keats was set
Ah.
alight.
Must be up a bit further.
Okay, so, the recommendations are to proceed with establishing paid parking at the Reef Car Park and for appropriate fee structures and time limits to be worked through. And it all have to ensure it's consistent with the reserve status of the function of the site.
So what you're saying is that could we also extend that consistency to that slipstream as well?
Yeah.
That is an option.
Okay, the last couple of ones, there's the diagonal car parks on Vortia Street. So this has been around a while actually as an option so in the circled area, change that from parallel parking to diagonal parking to get more car parks out of the same amount of road. In fact, that's the same area where at one stage there was consideration of car parking building in that same area, which obviously didn't come to pass. But the findings there are that the road is unfortunately a bit too narrow.
Yeah.
And it's got too high volume of traffic to really make it suitable for diagonal parking. It might work if the through route was switched to Raffles Street. And I'll just go back. So the resolution's not great, but you may be able to see that Raffles Street was actually at one time the straight ahead section of road coming from the Marine Parade and comes out to a roundabout there. At some point in the past, Vortia Street became the main route, and that's made it. At some point that it's that's made a much higher volume street with faster movements of traffic. So if there was some other reason to change the configuration between Raffles and Vortia, sure, but at the moment, no. Right, just the last one, someone did ask about parking on Hastings Street South. That's the portion outside down towards the
Warehouse.
warehouse, yeah. Things may have changed a bit since I wrote this. But certainly at the time, found there'd be little benefit in creating paid parking in this area, and it will create other issues. And so, particularly insofar as there are like the backpackers down there, some motels, so you'd have some knock-on problems. And it has historically been kind of out on the edge of CBD. It's one of those places where you just think, well, if you get up early enough in the morning, get yourself a car park, sweet, good on you. And sometimes it's just not worth chasing for the money. So that's where we got to with that. So that's the end of my presentation. I just finishing up there with a picture of Napier, parking in Napier 1947, empty streets all the way.
People were a lot
Matching
fitter,
cars.
then, weren't they? They were a lot fitter and healthier in 1947.
So, yeah, in the days before there were parking issues. But, you know, again, it's a useful one to reflect on as to, again, why we have parking controls. So, at one time, they were unnecessary.
Stuart Nash's house.
Right,
Very well, thank you for your time.
Thanks,
thank
Steve.
you, Murray.
Any other questions?
To be fair,
Any
most of the
questions?
people lived on the hill then.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, you can see the bus going in there to the old NZR bus. So there would be much greater bus service going on there.
Oh, yeah.
So we pulled it down and put car parks on it.
That's
So
right.
there's no bus now.
Yeah, was there something?
No, there was
And we had
end up a
tram.
scaffolding place in the end, wasn't it? For
I don't think there's any easy answers, unfortunately. I know. Any questions? Oh,
Do you notice there's no cathedral?
I did notice that.
no people.
what's
Cathedral.
Oh, no, yeah, no
No
cathedral.
cathedral. No, that's that's one that got moved to down to Wycliffe Street,
Right.
and then
Okay.
the new cathedral was built on that side.
Thank you very much. team.
Very good, thanks very much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Stuart Nash's house is quite big, eh?
It was weird walking past there the other night.